Hello, and thank you for tuning into this week's history episode of Bite-Size Cybercrime, the podcast where we discuss some interesting cybersecurity history. And this week we will be going way, way back, probably as far back in cybersecurity history as you go, to the very first virus and antivirus ever made. This is the story of a little experiment to make a self-replicating piece of code, and another experiment to find and delete it just to see if it could be done. The story of Creeper and Reaper. The first malware ever created was a worm called Creeper. A worm is a type of malware that is able to replicate itself and spread copies of itself across multiple systems or networks. Worms can be destructive and massively slow down network traffic, consuming all the bandwidth for its own purposes. Creeper was created in 1971 by programmer Bob Thomas, and although it was a worm, Thomas's original version just spread rather than actually replicating itself. However, one of Thomas's coworkers, Ray Tomlinson, wrote a new version of Creeper which was able to replicate itself as it spread. This version would definitively cement Creeper not only as the very first worm, but the first malware to exist on computers ever. Unlike virtually any malware that would come after it, Creeper was not actively malicious. It didn't delete any files, and it didn't even really slow down systems considerably, as most worms tend to do. It just displayed a simple message: "I'm the Creeper, catch me if you can." Did it have the potential to take down massive infrastructure and slow down networks to a halt? Not really. Perhaps on a larger network if it were able to replicate itself fast enough, but that wasn't really the nature of the experiment. Every machine the Creeper infected, they had permission specifically to infect. It was more the implications of the program that were far, far more concerning than the program itself. There was potential for self-replicating worms to spread through networks, and that opened a lot of doors for malicious purposes. However, not all the outlooks were bad. Self-replicating programs could be used to simulate network traffic for testing purposes, or stress test machines and networks, as long as it doesn't get too out of hand and spread out of control, as many worms tend to do. In an interview with OS News, Tomlinson described the Creeper as being more like an allergy than a cold when asked how many machines it infected, then elaborated, stating that it was no more than 28. He also confirmed it caused no other unintended issues with the machines it infected. There were no issues with bandwidth, it just displayed the "I'm the Creeper, catch me if you can" message. 28 machines really does not seem like a lot, but keep in mind all of this was before the internet was even a thing. ARPANET would later become the internet, but it was still a relatively small public network, though larger than anything that had come before it, and it was mostly used by researchers. There were no bad actors yet, and most people on ARPANET were generally trusted not to cause any mass destruction. Still, with the first virus soon came the first antivirus named Reaper. Reaper was developed in 1972 by Ray Tomlinson, the same man to make improvements on the Creeper worm from Bob Thomas's original program. The Reaper's only job was to detect and catch the Creeper, removing it from systems and stopping the spread of the worm. In that same interview, Tomlinson also said he just did it for the sake of it. It was really just another experiment in this very experimental time. Reaper also worked a lot like Creeper. It was not self-replicating, much like the very first version of Creeper by Bob Thomas, but it was able to travel through ARPANET on its own to delete the Creeper virus. This was creative, and may work fine on a very small network, although today a traveling antivirus would be rather impractical due to the size of the internet. Not to mention it was practically a worm itself, and on a larger network could unintentionally cause issues with consuming all the bandwidth, not making it much better than Creeper or any other worms. Modern antivirus sits on one host and simply downloads new signatures from the internet when the vendor updates them. Signatures are patterns that malware has that can be detected, and it is what allows an antivirus to catch and take actions on malware. Reaper was programmed to detect a signature from Creeper, which is how it was able to delete Creeper without harming anything else on the mainframe. This is also why it's important to install all those Windows Defender updates. although some antiviruses today actually use AI and machine learning to detect unusual behavior from programs and quarantine them, rather than looking for exact code signatures. It's safe to say we've really come a long way from the first initial virus and antivirus, with both becoming very sophisticated and constantly playing a cat-and-mouse game with each other. Attackers developing new evasion techniques and defenders learning new ways to detect and block those techniques. So, although the first virus and antivirus were rather anticlimactic and more of an experiment, it would still set a very interesting precedent for the future. Thank you to Forbes, OS News, and the PC Insider for information on the very first virus and antivirus. And of course, thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Bite-Sized Cybercrime. I really hope you enjoyed, and until next time, stay secure.